Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, you can't pause like that. The season's getting close. Do you know how I know the season's getting close?
I got a good idea.
The answers are getting a lot less specific during these interview sessions as everyone kind of goes, 2 weeks and 2 days from now, huh? Well, best not talk about all that.
It's a lot of you'll see, you'll see, and that's great. I can put that in a story. Here's my 8-word story with 6 words of leading up to it, and then just you'll see, he said. There, boom, 10 words. Perfect. Great job. Thank you.
If you add an adjective, he said mysteriously, boom, just increase your word count by like 12.5%.
Almost doubled it pretty much. So we are here in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, talked to the defensive line today. So live stream viewers, go ahead and throw in your questions. We'll get to those as we go through here. Let's run through who we talked to. Mr. Larry Johnson, Caden Curry, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Tyleek Williams, Ty Hamilton, Taiwan Malone,
Mitchell
Melton. Am I missing a defensive tackle in there? Mike Hall. We did not talk to Mike Hall.
No Mike Hall. Hero Canoe was there, but just watching. Steel Chambers and CJ Hicks were there, but just watching. I think question of the day from Steel Chambers to Mitchell Melton, favorite flavor of Pop-Tarts? Mitchell Melton's answer, s'mores. Strong choice.
I mean, it's good, but it can't be a favorite. Favorite is what you go to all the time, and that is cherry, frosted cherry. That is,
Kevin is pointing approvingly from behind the camera. As you may be able to tell from my face, if we got a mixed package of Pop-Tarts of cherry and virtually any other flavor, I think we'd be able to split those just fine.
The chocolate fudge reminds me of a thing my grandma used to make, which was just like graham crackers and chocolate frosting. So that takes me back. It's like a time machine. That's a good one, too. But we're not here just to talk about Pop-Tarts. We're also here to talk about the Ohio State defensive line. And the singular message that was brought forth today from just about everybody was playing as one. No longer not playing as one. I don't want to say playing on your own or winging it or whatever, but it seemed the message this time around this year is about doing your 1/4, I guess, on the defensive line and not worrying about stats and anything else. And before we get to the rest of our thought, Kevin, we got a super chat.
From Ryan Dawes, I know starting is a fluid term, but does Kenyatta Jackson start over Jack Sawyer?
Does Kenyatta Jackson start over Jack Sawyer? Nothing we have seen to this point would indicate that. So,
No.
as you know, as it was mentioned, starting is a fluid term, but no, I think your starters are pretty set. I think the most unset, the most fluid starting on the defensive is that defensive tackle with the 3 starters they have there. But I think there's 2 clear guys at defensive end.
Yeah, it's going to be JT Tuimoloau. It's going to be Jack Sawyer. And then the next 2 guys are going to be Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson. And then you kind of see after that, Mitchell Melton's probably in that mix as well. It sounds like Mitchell Melton has been taking more reps at defensive end as opposed to Jack recently. He said it's been kind of 50-50 throughout the fall, but maybe a little more in terms of defensive end recently. Larry Johnson, I'm going to call him, I was supposed to call him Larry and then be like, don't be a Gary Danielson and be like, oh, my friend Nick, who coaches Alabama, maybe you heard of him. Yes, so Larry.
Call him Coach J.
Yes, Coach J is what the folks in here call him. Larry Johnson talked about the fact that they, when you can't have guys playing 70, 80, 90 snaps a game times 15 games. You will break dudes if you do that. So they know, he knows he's going to have to rotate, and that's, the way he rotates and when he rotates has been a little bit of a point of consternation for Ohio State fans. But you are going, even if Kenyatta Jackson is not a starter, Caden Curry's not a starter, Mitchell Melton's not a starter, you get the sense you're going to see 15, 25, 20, 25, maybe more snaps for those guys on a number of occasions this fall.
Yeah, I think the thing I always go back to is Nick Bosa started somewhere between 7 and 10 games at Ohio State in his career, but he was always part of the rotation in his 2.2 years with Ohio State. Playing as one and how it's different than it was a year ago, you can't help but think, well, and I'll get back to that thought in a moment. Kevin, a super chat.
Another one from Ryan Dawes because he double punched one. Does Mike Hall outsack the defensive ends?
Does Mike Hall from Ryan Dawes, thank you for the super chat. Does Mike Hall outsack the defensive ends? Individually, I think there's an argument to be made there. Totally, that's going to be much tougher. But every year, you have this competition between the defensive tackles and the defensive ends. I didn't get into it this year because it's still early. But in terms of who ends up with the most sacks this year, it should be the defensive ends. But if Mike Hall is healthy, I've seen that dude. I'm the only person who has seen this pick up, 3 or 4 sacks and 8 snaps. So I don't know if anybody else has noticed that. He's I think you could call him the best pass rusher on the team, and you're not going to sound crazy.
You're not going to sound crazy. I think you're also, you got to remember this is JT Tuimoloau's on this team, and they've got some other very good pass rushers on this team. I think it's going to be a question of how much does that mindset, the do things together kind of mindset that you were talking about earlier, how much does that play in? Because Larry Johnson said they don't look at individual stats. They don't look at, this guy had 4.5 sacks last year and this guy only had 3. They look at sacks for the unit, because sometimes, the example he gave was if JT Tuimoloau was getting triple teams, JT Tuimoloau is probably not going to get a sack on that play. But they can't double and triple everyone, so that's going to open up someone else. So if he's doing his job and occupying 2 or 3 blockers, and that means someone else is getting singled and they get the sack, did they do all the work? Are they the only one that deserves the credit? No, you look for the whole thing. So, Larry Johnson would say the question is moot. I would say the question is intriguing. I'm gonna sort of take the field here, just because I think someone, one of those guys is going to end up with more sacks than Mike Hall. Don't ask me who. I think you've got an argument for several different guys who could end up as the leading sacker.
Sonny Styles.
I mean, you look at last year's team, who was the leading sacker? Jack Sawyer. And
together.
Yeah, but Jack Sawyer. Everyone looked at Jack Sawyer and went, well, he had a terrible year, and JT Tuimoloau had an incredible year, and so what the stats look like on the stat sheet is not always, you can predict it, and the stats do not always necessarily reflect that, because it is 4 guys working in unison when things are working correctly.
And that all goes into the question that was asked. And talking with Ty Hamilton, he throws out, we're about this playing as one and grinding out the impurities. I'm like, that's a strange thing for a player to say. Where'd you hear that from? And it's like, that's something that Ryan Day and other coaches have been talked about, just grinding out the impurities. I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? Like, what impurities have been ground out from you? And he's like, not worrying about stats. And that goes right into the playing as one, not caring who gets the sacks, who gets the tackles. And I wanted to be like, Ty, you're a nose tackle. You had to have that ground out of you a long time ago. You can't worry about the stats. But also, when you're a nose tackle, and you also have Mike Hall at nose tackle, and he can put up, he does put up stats. There's going to be some focus on that. But the getting rid of that sort of thing is interesting, and playing as one and not freelancing, because it's hard to say we're playing as one now without implying that you weren't before. And you look at the players that were here before and they're no longer here, and is that them being thrown under the bus? Nobody's being thrown under the bus, but when they all say, I'm not going to mention any names, then you just...
That's bus adjacent. It's I think they are. How many times in the last couple of years have we looked at defensive ends who are almost there, but then the ball gets away, and you have it feels like they have individual guys will have 3-4 quarterback pressures and no sacks, and you're just half a step away, and it's like when you are trying to, it's like, I'm just going to do this a little bit harder, and then you lose your form, you lose your technique, and then you get, that's when you get in trouble. When you're running down to first base and you're almost to first base, and it's like, I just need to jump and lunge and get there, and it's like, well, that actually takes longer. Even though you think it gets you there faster, it actually takes longer to get there. you have to kind of stay true to your technique, stay true to what you're being taught, because the stuff they're looking at and like the absolute minute details they're looking at for this stuff is incredible. Larry Johnson talked about, JT Tuimoloau and how his first step is faster, and JT talked about his first step being faster. And someone asked, what goes into getting a first step faster? And he said, you watch every snap of practice on film and you freeze it. And okay, your first step was here. Okay, this first step is a little bit too far outside. Okay, this is a little too short. This is a little too long. It has to be here, and then you got to rep that, and then you do it again, and you look at it the next day, and is this okay? This one was too long, this one was too short. This is such minute stuff that number one, you have to rep it enough that it becomes muscle memory, but number two, you can't be pushing yourself, straining yourself, like, oh, I'm going to do a spin move here. He gave that example at one point. I'm going to do a spin move here, and then now, first of all, it maybe slows you down. Second of all, it maybe gets you out of position, and then if you're out of position, then there's a hole there. That, because you're freelancing, you're not in your gap, you're out of your position, and then there's a hole there for someone to run through.
The philosophical change, and I don't even know if that's really true, that was kind of talked about today, where the focus now is so much more on stopping the run. And then once you've done that, go and get the quarterback. We've talked in the past where obviously you always want to stop the run. That's always the first focus. But Larry Johnson has said in the past, go get the quarterback, stop the run on the way. That's sort of the mentality. Now that's kind of opposite. And I think that might be a welcome thing for Ohio State fans, that the focus is stop the run first. And again, that's always the focus, but like you're speaking it into existence more, and you're more concerned about it. So you're focusing on it more in terms of playing as one, stopping the run, and then whatever else happens, you've got really good players who can use technique to get around and then turn this into a pass rush. And at the very least, you can collapse a pocket, you can create some issues, and you have a secondary that should be able to cover. So by keeping things, it's almost a less aggressive, but still mentally physical. And I don't know if it's less aggressive or not, but is it safer?
Well, I think if you look at the last two games of last year,
right,
specifically, let's look at the fourth quarter of the Michigan game last year. They had multiple times where they got real aggressive, and it wasn't quite like when you do put punt block on 4th and 1 in the old NCAA game, but it was, you recover 0 at times, and there's no one back there, so you've really got to make sure you're in your spot and everyone's doing their job and not trying to play hero ball, because you get one, was it Tyrone Jenkins? Leroy Jenkins. Yes, one Leroy Jenkins, and Donovan Edwards just going 75 yards. And when I heard that, I thought, this feels like this is a direct solution to address the very specific problem you saw at the end of the Michigan game, where one guy gets out of his gap, and then there's a gap and there's no one else, and then you're watching a guy run down the sidelines.
Yeah, and you've talked with Ross and Devin on the X's and O's side about occupying the offensive line with the defensive line in the past, and how that was maybe expected last year, but it didn't happen as much as maybe they're determined to make it happen this year. I was wondering if the jack had even been worked out at all, but you mentioned that Mitchell Melton said he's been there some. So what's going on there?
Well, he said it's kind of been 50-50 for him. This is another one of these, it feels like we should be able to get a relatively straight answer on this, and it was all a little vague. He said described it as 50-50, but he'd been more a defensive end recently. We'll see how much that ends up being, being a factor this year, because Mitchell Melton is someone who it sounds like they're getting to the point where they're comfortable having him just be a straight up pass rusher at defensive end. And if he's in that rotation now that Amari Abor is out for, Larry Johnson didn't want to say out for the year, but it sounds like out for an extended period. Ryan Day used the three dreaded letters ACL when he talked about it earlier. So, I think you assume you're not going to see him for quite a while this year. Okay, now you're down to basically 4 guys who are, true defensive ends this year. You've got JT Tuimoloau, you got Jack Sawyer, you got Caden Curry, you got Kenyatta Jackson. Those are your 4 true veteran defensive ends. You got Joshua Mickens. He's a true freshman. That's going to take a while. You got Arvell Reese. He's a freshman who may or may not stay at defensive end. That's going to take a while. So Mitchell Melton is, he's your fifth guy. And it feels like if they're looking at play, he talked about playing 5, maybe 6 guys if you can, if you've got 5 or 6 guys you really can trust, then that's, then there, maybe that's the role for him this year. And it's less about the jack, but I feel like also we're going to get 2 weeks into the season and either have seen it as much as we thought or not at all and kind of go, aha.
Well, if we're not seeing Mitchell Melton there and they're still using it,
yeah,
I've got 3 words for you.
Mm-hmm.
CJ Hicks.
Mm-hmm.
Just something.
I don't think J is a word, but
it is.
Okay.
Jay.
Okay.
SEEJAY.
Mm-hmm.
But see, there you go. It's his middle name. But that's something that maybe if we get to talk to Jim Knowles again at some point, talking to Larry Johnson doesn't really care to talk about the jack all that much. It's an interesting situation because at the end he's like, yeah, I don't even, like when it's out there, who's coaching it or, who's coaching it off the field on the practice field, like, I don't even know. It's just this thing where when somebody doesn't want to talk about something, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
What? Oh, I got to go.
Maybe he just stands there, just like turns his back to the practice field in a form of silent protest. If
reads
they,
a newspaper.
Yeah.
Except there are no newspapers anymore, so you really can't do that. That's where maybe you just pick up the phone and hello, that sort of thing. But it will be interesting to see because they've done 5 defensive ends before this year. I believe they did it last year. Go back to 2017 when you had 4 guys, and then you add in Chase Young and Jonathan Cooper as a redshirt freshman. So they can go as deep as they need to. And this being the 4th year for Mitchell Melton, the last time he played in a game, Tom, do you know when the last time he played in a game was?
It was not at any point last year. So 2021, he played, 4 games that year? No, did not play any games that year. Was it in high school?
No, it was the season opener of 2020, October something or other.
Against Nebraska. Wow,
that
okay.
was the only time he's played, was his first game.
That's quite a while ago.
It is quite a while ago. And so obviously they want to get him involved, just get some of that rust off and just, hey, thank you for sticking around. Here's your reward. So I think they can figure that out. I'm interested to see if he is able to hold off the young guys or can move ahead of them, and because he's the oldest of the defensive ends. Basically, he's a 4th-year guy, and he's been through so much. So I think everybody's rooting for him. Obviously, Kevin, do we have any questions in the queue? I don't need any. I was just wondering. Anyway, Tom, back to you. No, Kevin, what do you got?
We got this one from Bucktown Bully. Sounds like Coach Jay is still planning to rotate often unless conditioning gets better for players to able to stay in for more plays, or is it strictly about limiting the risk of injury?
It is kind of both. And he said one of the things they evaluate during practice is how many reps can a guy go and be going at full steam. So if a guy shows during practice, he can be, they know what full speed looks like. And if a guy can only go full speed for 10 snaps or 15 snaps during practice, then that means that he's only going to be in there for 10 to 15 snaps during the game. And if a guy can go 30 or 40, well, then that's kind of how they budget it out. Ultimately, the end goal is to, number one, be fresh and not wear down over the course of the game, but also maybe even more importantly, not wear down over the course of the season, where if you're taking 60 reps as a defensive end, at some point you're going to get tired. And how often have we seen, you probably have seen this in your own life experience, when you're tired, when you're off, then your technique gets bad, and that's when you get hurt. And so
cranky.
Yeah, well, and also there's just exposures is the industry term in terms of like number of times you're going to get hit, and sometimes you're just going to get fallen on in the pile, and the number of times you are out on the field, that increases your chances to get fallen on in the pile, in addition to any of the strains and polls and all that kind of stuff.
We'll get to super chat real quick. I asked Tyleek Williams, who is back now, just started practicing again, was out since the first practice with a little knee situation. But every time we talk to him, it's about how's your conditioning, and obviously it's better than it's ever been, he said. And I asked him, what's a good number of snaps for you, and his answer is whatever it takes. That's that's where they are right now. But they also know, and Ty Hamilton said as well, the rotation is good for everybody, and that's what they've always said. Ryan Day wants that rotation to be a little smaller.
Mm-hmm.
I think you want to put more on the guys and maybe get more out of them, but you've got to find that balance. Kevin.
Super chat from Jordan Kapler. Kids had a rough night, so my brain no worky so good. Just pretend I asked a great question and respond accordingly. Cheers, guys.
Wow, that is a great question from Jordan.
I hadn't thought about that one.
No, it's and I mean really showcases, I think, a depth of knowledge that you don't typically run across in day-to-day interactions. That's I mean, always impressed with Jordan's questions. This one maybe more so than normal.
I was surprised Kevin was able to read it.
Well, that kind of goes without saying. I didn't want to be mean, but obviously, yes, that was my first reaction, as always. Yes.
Kevin.
Yes, jerks. Mark Fetters. What's the under the radar defensive lineman that could make an impact?
Who is the under the radar defensive lineman that can make an impact?
Is Kenyatta Jackson on? Does your radar go down to Kenyatta Jackson level? Because I feel like a lot more people's radars have pinged off of Kenyatta Jackson in the last couple of weeks than before. But 6 months ago, he would have counted as under the radar. Does he count?
I think Caden Curry's flying under it. Like he's using
that's true.
Kenyatta Jackson camouflage. And the radar's just bouncing off of Kenyatta Jackson. He's just flying in scot-free. I think he's one to watch. Taiwan Malone has been interesting. Like when Ohio State goes into the portal and they bring guys in, you hear the other guys talking about how well they fit in. And you can go back to Joshua Jackson, right? No. The offensive lineman.
Yes, from Rutgers.
Yes. Yeah.
His
Joshua
name?
Rutgers.
Jay Jackson. No, that's too obvious.
Jonah Jackson.
Jonah J. Yes.
Thank you. Just so many Joshes on the offensive line. That's the issue there.
Jimmy Jackson. No, that was different. No.
That's number 22 in your hearts. Number one in your hearts also. Anyway, Jonah Jackson came in, fit in right away, and he was coming in to take some of these jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with Josh Simmons. Everybody said how much they liked him, how much he loved the fact that the first day they just opened their arms and said, "Hey, you want to go do something after lift?"
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then Taiwan Malone, everybody's like, he just fit in perfectly with the defensive line. His personality fit in with everybody. He bridges the gap between some guys and their personalities.
Mm-hmm.
And when Ryan Day is always talking about culture fit, it's these reasons why, in terms of just integrating in seamlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've seen how well he has done so far to be able to working with the ones and the twos, while Tyleek Williams is out. But there's some confidence there. I know Larry Johnson has always been very cautious when talking about him because there's a lot of unknowns because he spent so much time with baseball and hasn't spent as much time as he is now with football.
Well, and why is he such a good culture fit? He's coming from Mississippi. Well, that's a very different place than Ohio. And, he is much like Davis Ignosin, a Northeast guy who went to Ole Miss and then had been talking to Ohio State and then went to Ole Miss and is now back at Ohio State. Malone, his decision, very openly, even at the time, I remember talking to Alex on a bunch of shows because he's from Alex's neck of the woods. And at that point, baseball was driving the decision, and Ole Miss baseball is better than Ohio State baseball, and SEC baseball is better than Big Ten baseball. So the opportunity to play in the SEC, if baseball is driving your decision, well, that kind of drove the decision. And he said he got to a point where with his family, they made a decision that, focusing on football will allow me to reach my goals in football. And that's kind of the best path forward for him and for his family. So that was what drove that decision. And he said, if it was purely a football decision, you kind of got the sense that it very well might have been Ohio State coming out of high school. And he said his relationship with Coach Jay drove the fact that this was, immediately right at the top of his list. As soon as you saw him go in the portal, you kind of went, aha, I see where this is probably going. And that is where it went. And that makes it, you probably know some of these guys from recruiting. You were probably at some of the same recruiting events as these guys. You're sort of traveling in the same circles as some of these guys. So this is not an entirely new thing. But, I think to your point, they have done a really good job of integrating people. I can only think of one player who was very openly not welcomed at Ohio State. And that was just by one player who advised him not to swing and miss twice. But then that situation resolved itself just a couple weeks later.
It sure did. Somebody asked Larry Johnson, did you tell him I told you so? I was like, that's exactly what a 20-year-old wants to hear from an adult, on a decision they've made about college or their life as an 18-year-old. I told you so. Yes, I'm back in the portal now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kevin.
Yes, Ryan Dawes. Over under total sacks against Indiana.
Over under total sacks against Indiana for the Ohio State defense. Tom. Indiana starting a new quarterback. You have a number in mind?
I have a number in mind.
Is it 5.5?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say you're gonna say it's low.
Is it 4.5?
It was 3.5.
Wow. Okay.
I think the question is, I think Indiana starting a new quarterback. Indiana spent a lot of last year diving into the transfer portal, and it didn't work real well. And they spent much of this offseason diving back into the transfer portal, and we'll see how it works. But generally, if you are a 20 guys out of the transfer portal team, that's not going to go great for you week one. So 3.5 might be low, maybe 4.5. But I mean, five. Well, I feel like we're always high on sacks. I maybe am over adjusting a little bit here because it feels like 5 or 6 is realistic, but also we always end up high on that. So
I'll stick to your guns.
I'm going to say over under a 4, and we can hope for a very exciting push. When the defensive line talks about getting pushed, that's what they mean.
Yes, we just want everybody to not lose any money on their bets. That's the message. Yes, loud and clear, Tom. Great. Kevin?
Yeah, I was looking at how many sacks they had against Indiana last year. I'll have to hold on that one. Big Earn. Are you guys hearing the chatter about Devin Brown looking like he's going to end up being the starter?
Are we hearing the chatter about Devin Brown looking like he's going to be the starter? The chatter on the internet.
It depends on who you want to listen to, because there is Kyle McCord chatter, there is Devin Brown chatter, there is, we have had a very limited window to watch during practice, so you can find people to tell you just about anything, and sometimes you can find people to tell you both things.
Well, and I will tell you, I think just about everybody here has been told both guys in terms of from people who know, say they know, people who, all kinds of different sources that are convinced it's going to be this guy or it's going to be that guy. And when you have people telling you both, does that really mean anything?
Well, I think the only thing that's certain right now with the quarterback battle is whoever wins, there are certain people who I will definitely tell you, say, I told you that was true. Because 20-year-olds might not like hearing it, but people on message boards, Tony, they love to hear that.
Yes, and they also like to point out when I am wrong about stuff.
Has that come up?
Just once. Kevin, anything else?
Yeah, we do, but to answer the question, in 2022, 4 sacks against Indiana. 2021, 5 sacks.
So 2022, 4 sacks against Indiana. 2025, 5 sacks. We can set the over under at 4.5. That's fine. I will allow it.
Are you taking the under?
I'll be the hater that takes the under. Yes.
I was going to take the under, but then I remembered. Oh yes, CJ Hicks. So I will take the over. Just on CJ Hicks.
There you go,
Kevin.
Jordan Kapler, is the defensive line feeling the confidence of the secondary and vice versa?
Is the defensive line feeling the confidence of the secondary and vice versa? I think, yes. I think this is a very confident group overall. A group that, a couple of the guys today said, I think JT Tuimoloau said it, and maybe Tyleik Williams saying the defense is going to win some games this year. Like they want shutouts. They don't want an offense that has to score 40 or 50 points a game. So they want to be the reason for the wins this year. They want to win games. They're not saying the offense is going to struggle. If they score 40 or 50 points, great. They just don't want them to have to. And so that's the goal this year for the defense, is to win games. And you're seeing that from all levels. We've heard nothing but good things about the secondary all along. And I don't think there are any concerns about the defensive line. So I think that the two units should, obviously they do coexist for the pass rush and the pass defense as a whole. So I think they're doing – I think the communication and the complementariness is a word, Tom, is all there.
Yeah, and when we talked to Jim Knowles earlier this year, it felt like that was something that he was feeling pretty good about the defensive line, pretty good about the secondary. that's kind of, those are complementary pieces in terms of the in terms of pass defense, and also the defensive line is maybe one of your biggest pieces in terms of run defense. We know they're feeling pretty good about the linebackers, so it feels like all of the pieces are there for this to be a pretty improved Ohio State defense.
I mean, everybody, as we keep saying, all of they talk well, they talk highly of how things are going, and they're excited. And so, yeah, we repeat that, and it's like, well, you're just parroting what the coaches and players are saying. They're not going to tell you things.
Mm-hmm.
But look at who they have, what they do, the improvements that have to be made in year two of the same defense. It's easy to do that math that things are going to be better.
Well, and we've talked about this before. We've both been doing this long enough that there are ways, this is the time of year when everyone's great and everyone's in the best shape of their life and everyone has never felt better. And, boy, everything's really coming together. There's a way to say that. That's just you're saying it. And then there's a way that comes across when they mean it. And there are certain guys that you're hearing about so frequently that it's like, okay, there's something there. There's certain position groups you're hearing about frequently. It's like, okay, this is going to be better. And just, our limited viewing opportunities this fall, what you've seen has been a lot of what, sort of in line with what we're hearing. So at some, yes, it's very easy to say that. And, Indiana head coach Tom Allen got up at media days and talked about like, oh, really encouraged about this season. It's like, no, you're not. You're going to lose. You're going to win 2 games and then you're going to get fired. But there's a way to have that conversation that we just all kind of go, yeah, okay, that's probably not true. And then there's a way to talk about it. And the way the people around here talk about things where, we know when we can generally tell when there's a little bit of false confidence. And we can also tell when you're getting a little bit of the Nick Saban where it's like, whoa, well, yes, these guys are really, really good. And yes, they're going to have a great season, but I have to keep pushing. You don't get the rat poison with the people saying encouraging things about your team. You can kind of tell after a while, and it feels like this is, things are trending in a positive direction in a lot of areas.
Yeah, Jack Sawyer, talking to him, mentioned being happy to be back at defensive end, and somebody asked him, how do you view your career to this point? And he said, I think there probably isn't anybody on the defensive line that has had the career they thought they'd have to this point. And so that is another thing that drives everybody is to, especially these guys in their contract year, essentially now. They can go after this year. So you're going to want to put your best and your fastest foot forward out there. Kevin, do we have anything else?
Peace plan, 2 points. Sawyer needs to have his hand in the dirt. And 2, if Hall doesn't play a majority of snaps, period, full stop.
So Jack Sawyer is going to have his hand in the dirt. They have moved him off the jack. He's going to be defensive end full time this year. So, okay, check that one off the list. And then Hall playing the majority of snaps. Mike Hall, we didn't get a chance to talk to him, which is a little odd, but he is someone who is going to fall under that thing that I talked about with Larry Johnson earlier, where they're going to see how many snaps you can play at full speed. If he's healthy and he can play 40 snaps in practice at full speed, well, I bet he's going to play 40 snaps during games. And, can he stay healthy, and what magic number? Those are the 2 factors that are going to go into that decision.
Yeah, and last year you had situations where Tron Vincent was playing over 40, 50 snaps because for whatever reason, and that's too many. And so can Mike Hall play 45 snaps? I'm sure he could. Do they want him to? I don't know if they do. And if he's effective, why not? But it's the effectiveness that is going to determine how many snaps he has past, 32 or 35 in that range. Kevin, all set? All right, Tom, anything else from today?
I think we've hit on all the big stuff. I scrolled through my phone earlier and didn't see anything else that I'd written down as like, oh, this was interesting. So guess we're done.
My notebook. I can't read any of this. So that's going to do it. I want to thank you all for joining us today on this afternoon. Thank you for tuning in. Of course, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. Check us out there as well. And, of course, YouTube.com. If you're watching this right now, go ahead and hit the thumbs up. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you haven't. Like this video if you do. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.